Okay, all right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning and welcome to the ETNZ online session with some insights from some of our colleagues who have been working globally over the last several years and have returned to New Zealand to continue what they do, to work from back in New Zealand after working all over the world. And towards that end, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce to you our panelists for this discussion today. First of all, joining us remotely via Zoom, Natalie, who's a very talented stage manager, currently in isolation looking after her cat. Not terribly well at the moment, and best wishes for a speedy recovery to your cat. Natalie's been based in London between 2016 to 2020, working there at such theatres and venues as the Old Vic, and working as a deputy stage manager throughout the UK. Productions at the National Theatre and in venues all over the UK. She has returned to New Zealand and continued her craft here. Recently being deputy stage manager on the touring production of Jersey Boys, and later on this year will be show caller for the next World of Wearable Arts production. Welcome, Natalie. The not so young gentleman beside me, Mr. Alistair Cameron, he's a tiger, is originally from Christchurch, as many of you will know, and has joined the circus, really, in previous years after a storied career doing such notable large events in New Zealand such as the Rugby World Cup, touring nationally with the ballet, as so many of us have and continue to do, and is currently now based back in Auckland and is working on the newly opened production of The Lion King here in Auckland. Just before the session started, Alistair and I were trying to figure out when we'd last caught up outside of the obligatory time in a pub. We last met in Sydney, actually, and at that stage we were looking at what the direction of the global touring industry would be, especially for Cirque du Soleil, where they were undergoing some changes. And then, of course, well, we had COVID, and the rest is history. So thank you for joining us from the show today, for the show today, Alistair. Thank you. And our third panelist is Mr. David Eversfield. If you've been in New Zealand in the last sort of 10 or 15 years and ever been to a large telecom Christmas display, you would have seen some of his work. He's the person behind the interactive illumination technology that was used throughout I believe the first decade of this century, with all of the Spark campaigns. And David's been based overseas in Hong Kong, working for a variety of clients, various theme parks and everything, and brands all over the world. And he's now returned back to New Zealand. He's really a lifelong entertainment practitioner. We first met back in my Silicon days, I would recall, actually, where you were working in some of the productions there. And he's now a founding director of entertainment solution provider Optic Shock. So what are we here today to learn? Well, some insights from Natalie, David and Alistair, about how they've managed to transition to coming back to New Zealand, things we're doing well here, things we could be perhaps doing better. A reminder, if you have any questions to put to them for this session, please put that up in the chat and I'll relay that to them, and we'll see if we can have an answer for you. Okay, so without further ado, perhaps David, you'd like to crack off and make a few starts.
Thank you. One of the things that we thought we might talk about is how New Zealand is a fantastic base for entertainment and developing entertainment technology. But as soon as you go offshore, a lot of those same skills continue, but the scale changes of how you apply them. I just have a few examples, primarily from a lighting perspective, for people to consider or think about. In the past, or originally, we would have started with a 12-channel dimmer pack kind of control solution, and eventually we move up to kind of one universe or two universe of DMX control channels.
Oh,
they will work over 100 megabit networking.
1 second. Shall we share that? Do you want to share that screen? Oh, it is? Great.
No.
That's not?
No.
Okay, 1 second here. Can we get that? There we go.
But pretty quickly, things scale up to be larger, and you end up with situations where you're dealing with 250 universes worth of DMX, which is possible over a gigabit networking, or possibly up to 400 universes of DMX. If you are really keen, you might say that it's almost half a kiloverse of control, if you can. But also the bandwidth of control that is required continues, with video now becoming distributed over IP as well. And sometimes we end up having to talk about 160 gigabit per second IP video streams.
Oh, 1 second. Are we streaming with that there? We are. Great. Cool. Okay, all right. 1 second here. We're just having a couple of little technical challenges with getting that across. There we go. That's okay. We're seeing that one now. Yep, there we go. Now we're all good. Great. Maybe step back a couple of slides there, David. Cool. Thank you.
Just getting through those again. 2 universes at 100 megabits per second, 250 universes in under a gigabit per second, 400 universes also fits in the 1 gigabit per second. And then once you're into streaming IP video, it can be up to 160 gigabits per second in uncompressed 4K streams.
So for, I mean, your perspective, Alistair, David's, talking about, scalability with the networking. I mean, from a production management side, going from, touring with the ballet and, with the production requirements with, juggling all of those elements, how does that scale up with your work with Cirque du Soleil, for example?
Oh, absolutely. The thing with our skill set we learn here in New Zealand is completely scalable about what we do. And it's just sort of going, oh, okay, right. So now rather than dealing with 2 trucks, we're now dealing with 27 or whatever, you know what I mean? So it's just having that mindset. And then once again, whether you're in New Zealand or overseas, it's having the right people around you, especially as a production manager, and so it's just, and that's what us Kiwis, are renowned for being good at, is sort of making stuff work and being adaptable. And that's where a lot of us, as I believe, if you'll use the word succeeded overseas, is taking that attitude off overseas, is because we have to learn so much here in New Zealand to make a living pretty much to get by. You need to sort of have so many different skill set, whereas back over, overseas, you can come out of school or theatre school and sort of specialise earlier. Whereas New Zealand, you sort of got to have a bit more of an understanding to sort of get through. So,
would you say generalists instead of specialists?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then, and then, of course, some people have specialised within New Zealand, absolutely. But that, but it all sort of comes back again to scale, which I'm going to bang on about all the time, is scale, and our population and our market. Our market is 5 million people at best. And that's not even Sydney, which is, it's not a criticism, it's just the way it is. You know what I mean? It's just the way it is. And that's, and we have to sort of cut our sails to make stuff work within that market size. But then when you're dealing, like on the show I was on at Cirque, you know, I can't remember, halfway through 2019, we had our 3 millionth patron to it, which is, you know, which had been running for 4 years at the time, you know, so that's sort of the scales we're talking, you know, so it's 2/3 of whatever it is of New Zealand, you know, it had been to see one Cirque show, you know, so it's that sort of scale is what I'm talking about, and the constant turnover.
Right.
You know, and it just keeps going. You know, that show, well, in pre-COVID, you know, a Cirque show in a tent was hopefully going to run for 10 years, you know, around the world, and then come back and go through maybe an arena, you know, so it's just those sort of numbers. For instance, in Tokyo, you know, we sat there for 6 months in a 3,500 venue dome doing 10 shows a week, but you can do that when you're in a area of 35 million people. You know what I mean? So it's just that scale and which has a lot of pluses and also has some minuses as well. You know? Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
And Natalie, a question for you. You know, with your time in the UK, you know, after being here in New Zealand, and then you know, I recall my first time visiting the National Theatre in London, and you know, just the scale of everything was just, you know, obviously so much larger. But for you to work on a production there, you know, and obviously that's very much a stronghold of, you know, the traditional theatre culture in England. You know, being a New Zealander in that venue, in that space, you know, was there any ability, anything, you know, that you were doing differently that was then perhaps adopted by them, or vice versa?
Yeah, I think building on what everyone has said so far, I went overseas to specialize, and that was to specialize in being a show caller. Those opportunities just don't really exist in New Zealand consistently to be employed year round. So I went over there to specialize in that, and having that background of New Zealand generalist was just such an unlock, because as you say, people just go to drama school, they come out and then they're a show caller, whereas I had 10 years of stage management and production coordination and all these extra bits, and then going into the National Theatre, which is, as you say, like this absolute icon of British theatre. The very fact that being broadcast over the tannoy to 1,200 employees every day was a New Zealand accent, that in itself got people asking, who is this person? They're not British. Why are they here? How did they get here? And from that became, you know, all the Aussies and Kiwis who were in the building would kind of emerge and then come back into the Dorfman and go, hey, I hear there's a Kiwi here. How did you get here? And it was just this incredible kind of community that was very open to having that accessibility of an international person there. But I would say that they are really, really strict with what they do. I had to adapt a lot of my own, I guess, just my own informalities to match that level of professionalism that you're working with there. But I was really lucky to be encouraged by every stage manager I worked with to keep as much of the authenticity behind what made me good at my job, as long as I wasn't saying things like the stage is live, which we say here, but over there makes them think that there's some kind of electrical fault. So as long as the message was getting across, but yeah, the language had to be really specific to that industry for sure.
Yes, it's an interesting point. Thank you for that. I think I've shared that sense as well in my travels overseas, being a Kiwi, you know, and having that, you know, we do get set apart with our accent and various other things, but that wider community, and I certainly have my own fond memories of, you know, the supportive nature from not only New Zealanders but also Australians. You know, it's our regional differences tend to retreat a little bit on those wider sort of areas. You know, David, would you care to comment about that possibly with your time?
Seems like different parts of the world, specialities in different industries or style style of work. Initially, when I arrived in Hong Kong, there were lots of luxury brands, and so it was possible to do events specifically for luxury brands. Of course, now that has changed, and a lot of that work has moved elsewhere in the world, and possibly that applies to other industries as well. Maybe New Zealand is continuing to grow an international film and TV industry. Maybe we're able to grow a larger export live entertainment industry as well.
Yes, and Alistair, before you were engaged with Cirque du Soleil, I recall the times I caught up with you around Asia when you were working on Cameron Macintosh productions. Have you seen much of an evolution in your time abroad between working on those productions in the early stages of your career through to what you were doing before you returned to New Zealand?
I guess it's those days I was obviously a little bit younger and didn't quite have the responsibility of production manager. So I was a bit more focused on the lighting side of things and the technology. As a lot of you know, when the lights started moving, I sort of started stepping away from lighting and sort of got into production management. But yeah, I guess so. It's just sort of it's that older and wiser thing coming along, and just sort of getting working out what's important and what's not so important potentially, But yeah, but it's just this. Again, it's just the scale of stuff, though, So it's just that's the biggest sort of change, and the ability to be able to get stuff quickly. Whilst when you're overseas, as we all know, down here, where if we need something and it's overseas, it's at least a couple of days away. You know what I mean? In the US, you can order something and have something pretty much the same day if you want. You know what I mean? And a lot of the guys rely on that. You know what I mean? So it's us. It's one of the sort of positives of coming down from New Zealand, is that we generally got to think a bit more about what we may or may not need before we head out. Whereas in the US or wherever you can get stuff, get online and go to Uline and get it the same day or whatever. So yeah. I'm ranting. Sorry.
That's no worries. Okay, so we have a question for you, Natalie, from Paul Kenner, and his question is, as a ex-National Theatre practitioner coming back to New Zealand, he found it odd going from the factory environment of working on multiple shows at different stages of production, where everything was needed at your fingertips. I can certainly recall from my time in the building at the National Theatre, its vast set making facilities, and as Paul mentioned, everything there at your fingertips, and everyone being highly skilled, and all together in the same building. I think you alluded a little bit to that too. One of the drivers for you going abroad was to specialize in your craft, he's mentioning that this is as a contrast in New Zealand, that's quite different. We don't have those types of factory environments, and he'd like to know how much of a mind shift change is it for you coming back to working on productions here in New Zealand?
Yeah, that's a great contrast and a good question. We had our full set in the rehearsal room on day one at the National, and that included a workable, drivable Audi, and a Revolve. So it was beautiful, and you needed a prop, and within 5 minutes, the actual show prop was in your hand. So it was unreal working in that environment. I think the fact that I had 7 years in New Zealand in that industry first allowed me to appreciate what a huge shift that was in terms of what you can gain out of a rehearsal room when you are working with all the actuals and when you have a full team of people around you, and just how fast the process goes, because your cast, they're not thinking about the set, how it's going to be. They're not looking at a piece of tape on the floor going, that's a step. They're walking on the steps. So the process is a lot faster. The people that you're working with are just so much vaster. You're working with, there's 1,200 people in the National Theatre at any given time in terms of staff. So that scale is so different. It was definitely a shift coming back, and one I really had to remind myself of. But interestingly, I struggled because when I came back, the shift in my mind, I just went back 6 years. But that's not where New Zealand is. New Zealand's still been progressing in the 6 years that I've been away. So I was actually really pleasantly surprised, I think, going into the first production I did was as a show caller here was Jersey Boys, which we just finished. And that was really streamlined. We had a full rehearsal set as well. I came on board and it was really, really kind of the same standards almost, but just with a smaller team. I think the mind shift change between international and here, it's as Alistair's saying, it's all about scale, but if you can do it in New Zealand first, then anything you get overseas is such a bonus because you're only going to get more resources. So the fact that you can do it here and do it well just sets you up for anything overseas, I think.
Right, excellent. Thank you. I hope that answered your question there. I have another question here, a general one, and we'll go around and get an answer from each of our panelists. This is quite an interesting one from Andrew. His question, there's two questions here, is what do you miss most about working overseas, and what do you miss least? David.
All I can think of at the moment is I really enjoy the food overseas. But in terms of working, certainly being part of a very large team and being able to excel at what you do within that large team is a great experience. That might be what I miss. And what do I like about being back?
Yes. What do you miss least? Yes. Yeah.
What
are you
least?
happy you've left? You don't have to deal with.
Yes. There is a part of me that is wondering about travel and the amount of time that I have spent in airports and on planes and in transit. And I'm not sure if that's necessarily the best use of my time, or in fact, the best use of the planet's resources. And if environmentally, I maybe need to reconsider traveling in that style quite as much. So I'm still debating that and still working out how I feel about that.
That's certainly interesting that that's led you in some ways into what you're now doing back here in New Zealand, some of that ongoing work you've done working in that virtual space with collaborative teams from around the world operating in a live environment. Seeing some of the setups have been particularly exciting and groundbreaking. So that's certainly driving part of that, isn't it?
Well, being able to still have large collaborative teams, but some of those people are remotely joining the creative process is really cool. And to still be able to produce good quality output is exciting. And maybe that means we don't have to jump on the plane quite as much in the future.
And Alistair, so something you miss the most and something you miss not at all?
Oh, just really quick. I missed the weekly paycheck, which was great. And but I also missed I had 27 staff. I headed up. I missed the scale of what we were doing. I missed the fact that we were traveling every 4 to 6, 7 weeks. We're going packing up 95 containers all up and moving those around Australia. I miss the catering that we had.
Your
yeah.
production family.
Yeah. I miss all that. I miss that vibe very much, and I miss and I even miss the riggers. You know. So yeah. The least thing I miss is doing the expense report every month on the credit card.
Right.
I don't miss that for a moment, but it's lovely to be back home, and it's lovely to be being close to family again, and also I've been lucky enough to get bits and pieces of work. So
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, and we'll get to that. Actually, there's another relevant question about that. But Natalie, for you, is there something you miss most about working overseas, and something you don't miss at all?
Yeah, for sure. I specialized myself into a corner, I went over there to specialize, and that's exactly what I did. And I did not plan on coming back, and then COVID happened. And so I miss having a year-long calendar that's just show calling, that is just doing big spectacle things and getting to walk into a room and everyone knows what a DSM is, and just that's what I get to do every day. So I definitely miss that. I miss the support of having a stage management union as well. That was a really cool backstop that I'd never experienced before. So that was amazing. But I think, I miss the least is, the homesickness. It's so nice being this close to family. Being here at a time where just recently in the last 4 months, I lost both my grandparents, but having to be here for that, it was such a gift. That was, incredibly grateful. So I do think that I hadn't realized how much that distance had affected me, but I am surprisingly incredibly grateful to have had this situation happen and be back here with family. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. Oh, excellent answers, everybody. So on to another question here from Craig. His question, and it's applying, as I can read it there, to from travelling from New Zealand to overseas, like you all have. Natalie, you went over, to specialise. And his question, maybe you're the person to lead off on this one, is how much of a struggle or a challenge was it to apply for that specialist role when we do have, as you guys have mentioned, a generalist upbringing here in New Zealand? Is that an advantage for production employers, people who are looking to hire you as a specialist?
Yeah, specifically with being a DSM, I wanted to leave New Zealand in 2015. But then I talked with the opera and they'd offered me a year of being their DSM. And I can't tell you how much that year on my CV of being a DSM before I moved helped me in every single job interview. They appreciate your generalist skills. I think in my role, once you're in the role, once they've hired you, they realize that you've got all of this extra skill set. But I wouldn't have been able to get into the room for a lot of interviews without having that previous experience in that specialized area. I think because I was going over there cold, I didn't have any contacts. So I think it was 17 interviews in my first 3 weeks there for roles. And out of that, I got a ASM job offer on the West End, and then a very small regional tour DSM offer. And that, I think, was the absolute moment where I made the choice to go on the smaller scale thing, but do the thing I wanted to do, as opposed to lock myself into a role that would have been bigger, but not in the area. So having that mindset, that singular mindset, if you know what you want to do, I think is really helpful. That's just my experience as being specific. Yeah.
David, would you like to speak to that question?
There are opportunities in New Zealand to do really wonderful, innovative stuff, develop new techniques, use technology in interesting ways. And because I had been involved with some of those projects here, those became good examples for opening doors anywhere else, especially when for some of those applications, there aren't a lot of people internationally working on those things. And so to see people with experience from New Zealand meant that it was attractive, and it helped immensely.
And Alistair?
For me, it was so I applied for Cirque sort of mid 2000s, I guess, and I interviewed with them for a number of roles way back then, maybe late, I can't remember, late 2000s, whatever. And I didn't get the role, it was fun, and but it did allow. I did then go off and do a bunch of opening ceremony stuff around various, so Rugby World Cups were really kicked that off for me, and that sort of got me into that opening ceremony world a little bit. So I guessed appearance in a few times in Indonesia and Baku and Kazakhstan and Doha and various other places, but that gave me a bunch more international experience at a big level. And then when Cirque was scraping around the bottom of the barrel in about 2016, they pulled out my CV again, and I was able to offer the more international experience, which sort of got me in. I went straight in as a technical director on one of the tours. So yeah, that was, things happen for a reason, So, but what did surprise me, and here I'm going to go off on a slight tangent again, sorry, Phil, was Cirque's was a big organisation with eight tents running around the world, and there was obviously a bit of a churn of staff around the place, and I was always surprised about how many Kiwis didn't apply for the roles that were advertised. I thought I'd see more Kiwis.
Wow.
Maybe because they don't want to work with me. I get that, no problem. But but I was always a wee bit surprised about, for lighting roles or carp roles or rigger roles. I was always a wee bit surprised about how many, so few Kiwis would apply for. Maybe they don't want to work for Cirque, which is, no worries. But yeah, they always sort of pricked my ears up. Yeah.
That's an interesting observation indeed.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, all right. I hope that answered your question there, Craig. So just another quick little insight, seems to be a little bit of a common theme in the questions and everything. You all returned back to New Zealand. Okay. Natalie, you've mentioned a little bit about your observations when you were back on a show here. And what surprised you all coming back? Alistair, I've watched with great interest. You've jumped back on the trucks and done some national rock and roll touring again and everything. And David, you've also jumped back into working in some live aspects as well. Most recently for the Auckland Arts Festival, where you were running some lighting in the town hall up in Auckland here for some of the shows. What surprised you all when you were picking up the tools again here, coming back? Good and bad, all bad, perhaps. David, would you?
I was surprised I could remember how to turn the console on. I was not quite sure where the on button was, but managed to find it.
Yep.
And slowly, like getting back onto a bike or whatever, I returned, and it was good fun. And on many other projects, I wouldn't have had the flexibility and the wonderful creative expression and creative control and just immediate result from being able to busk some of those shows or create some of those shows in short term. Interestingly, in the last 2 weeks, I've been helping an Australian touring show where their LD has been locked down in Melbourne. And so just being able to step in and help them through their New Zealand tour.
Oh, right.
As well.
Okay. And, I've followed with great interest, your tour, Alistair, where you, struggled getting your truck caught in small streets in Palmerston North and various other places. What did you find surprising with your return?
Just how big the film industry is,
Right.
It always was, it was definitely, back in my day, it was sort of definitely, Wellington and Lord of the Rings and Avatar, all those early days, but then all the stuff that's going on up here as well in Auckland with Netflix and, Amazon and all that carry on, just and it's the impact that's having on our industry and sucking staff up and equipment. I was very, Chris Brown over at Theatrical Solutions was threw me some work, and I was delivering trust in the various productions, and just seeing the scale of that was just mind blowing. And then, then I was out with the production co doing a bunch of truck driving from Dobbin and the Dudes and various other little tours and stuff. And then, that's right, I was down at America's Cup for a bit,
That's right.
Yeah. Got back on the horse down at Waterfront up Panuku. Thanks, Paulie. And so I guess one of the things I was out, one of the things that did wind me up a little bit was, I parked up into a loading dock on one of those tours, and then the tech almost embarrassingly asked me to move the truck because I couldn't park the truck there for the day. I was going, why? But it's a loading dock. Hence the reason I ended up getting stuck. But anyway, I won't go on about that. But but it was just because they have an argument with their neighbour about a truck parking in their loading dock. And I went, really? So it was just that sort of little stuff that wound me up a little bit, but I got over that. But it's all good. It's great to be back. But I look forward to the day of getting back on a plane again as well, hopefully.
Right.
Yeah.
And Natalie, is there anything that came to hand, to elaborate a little bit on your comment earlier about, what you found that was surprising to you?
Yeah, for sure. I think I've been amazed. This is like stage management specific. I can't speak for the other departments, but I've been amazed at how the wage has just increased. It's matching. It's almost matching industry standards elsewhere. So that was a really nice surprise. I did not expect that. And it's, the gratitude that a lot of people have that I'm working with about the fact that we get to do what we do is really nice. Like, that's a great environment to be working in. But I was pretty surprised. Yeah, it has been quite difficult because of being specialized for a while. A lot of the companies I used to work for I did think just don't look at what I do as stage management anymore, and they're like, oh, you've got too much experience for this show, or you're too experienced for this. But there's not many places for you to go in terms of work when companies like Auckland Theatre Company or whoever write you off for being too experienced. So I've really struggled to know where to put myself or where to market myself, and it is a bit hard. Like, I don't see this as being like a full-time gig at the moment, because it's really hard to know where you fit in the industry when there's this view that you've kind of outsized it, I guess. So that's been a bit of a struggle for sure.
Yes, it's an interesting observation, actually. I recall some years ago now, the challenge it is for practitioners to go abroad and still to keep contact with their networks back here. And I think David managed that very well, I always thought, over the years. David was always around and about, even when he was actually abroad and overseas. He managed that very well, whereas others perhaps didn't do that. So when they returned from abroad, and then tried to pick up where they left off, I think they encountered some of those, what you've just mentioned there, in some ways, because they hadn't, kept up with their various networks and everything. I think it highlights the importance, perhaps, of doing that if you do wish to look at returning to New Zealand at some stage. Yeah. But also, as I think, in something you mentioned, Alistair, how you were surprised that not so many New Zealanders were applying for some of those roles at Cirque du Soleil. Maybe that's part of that networking, benefit that you can get, that comes both ways, possibly. Yeah. The people who are abroad, our practitioners who are abroad, maintaining some of those networks back home and getting that two-way sort of advice. I mean, I've always found it very helpful abroad with, New Zealanders who'd gone before me, to help provide any insights or guidance. And I'm full of admiration for you just jumping in there with both feet and getting on with it. Natalie. That's you know, that's remarkable what you've been able to do. You know,
And I think
absolutely.
it's that anomaly of the shock of COVID very
So
briefly
yes.
as well. Like,
You know, just we're please keep those questions coming if anyone does have anything. We've had some good sort of feedback there. I guess one of the questions I have, and we'll go around with each of you again, is you know, now you're back, you know, and given we've got the you know, our wonderful global pandemic and everything, which eventually we will settle into a way of working. You know, what is the future for each of you? You know, do you see yourselves now happily remaining here in New Zealand, or jumping into a role here, or are you waiting for the day when you've got those opportunities and the ability to travel back on abroad again? And if you are doing that, is there a you know, have you got a any thoughts about maybe having a balance between abroad and back here in New Zealand? David?
Not sure, still open.
Yep.
I would like to show just very quickly an area of development, just trying to look at things, alternative things that I may be able to do here, and things that are happening globally quite a bit. And this is in the area of virtual production and extended reality. That's taking a lot of the skill set that we have from real events and being able to turn that into something that's easier to consume for a camera. In particular, a little set of research that we looked at was in front of an LED screen. This is a New Zealand band called Chai, performing a song called Wow. And they're in front of an LED screen in this slide. And as I snap to the next slide, you can see that we've augmented that LED display behind them with some additional virtual lighting around them. And so this area of virtual lighting, virtual production, and extended reality is something that can happen during lockdown, and it can happen regardless of what country you're in. And it may be something that I'm going to continue to look at for a little while. Here's a very short little example video of how that worked out. This was filmed during lockdown with 4 people in the room in the studio. So I guess if I can continue doing this type of stuff, I might end up hanging out here.
Right. Okay. And Natalie,
yeah.
what's in your future?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's so tricky with COVID. I think it was such a shock. It was really, I don't want to understate that was definitely the reason that I was forced to come back. I had to pack up my London flat remotely. I was supposed to be here for a 3-week trip in February last year for my brother's wedding, and then everything happened. So I had to do everything remotely. I lost a year and a half worth of contracts. Didn't get to say goodbye to my friends or my flatmates or my network over there. So it was a real shock, and it was a really hard time, and there was a lot to grieve. So I think I would be very, very cautious before putting myself in a position where I experience something like that again. It was really hard. So this feels like my safe space for now. So definitely sticking around here for the time being. It's also complicated by visas. I was on a 5-year ancestry visa, and that will expire this year. So the idea of being able to go back, it suddenly becomes a lot less accessible. The cost of visas has tripled in the last 5 years. So you're looking at minimum $3,000 for a 2-year visa, upwards of $10K for a 5-year visa. So I think it's a much bigger decision than it was the first time, where you thought you could just jump on a plane if you got sick of it. a couple of the contracts that I had last year have been penciled for the Northern Hemisphere summer next year, and it's a couple of Broadway transfers of a London production. So I'd love to do that. I'd love to be able to go over there and do that, but yeah, who knows at this stage for sure.
And well, we don't have too much more time left. So, just very quickly, Alistair.
Yeah, I'd go back in a shot, Yeah, absolutely. And
All right.
yep, no, absolutely. But that's not to, I was very lucky to get international stuff with the working on Lion King, so it's lovely to work in that sort of scale again. But yeah, I'll, as soon as the borders open and we're allowed to travel,
Right.
I hope it'll get work overseas again.
Okay, and just a final comment from online from Nick, which we'll finish off with. And he's making a comment from being one of the Kiwis that did go away and work globally. His observation was that Kiwis often don't feel like they were good enough to work for the big companies in our industry globally. And he's saying the reality is that we are not only good enough, but we're also highly desired. So it's certainly an observation I would agree with. And it's perhaps in the ongoing efforts that our panelists today have been contributing to, the very high reputation that New Zealand practitioners in our industry are regarded. So yes, that's absolutely correct. So grateful thanks. It's time to wrap up, but grateful thanks to our panelists this morning, Natalie, Alistair and David. And thank you again to our team of providers for assisting with bringing the conference online. That's Multimedia Systems and Verlo. And a shout out again to our trade show exhibitors who are also working online as well, as we don't have our show. That's including Aspiring Safety, Fiasco Limited, Jans New Zealand, John Herber, Kennedine Entertainment Lighting, Lighting Supply Group, MDR Sound and Lighting, Metro Productions, Scenic Solutions, Showquip, Show Technology, Stagemark, Theatre Light, and ULA Group. And don't forget to get your online passport stamped to go into the draw from and win the chance to get some fantastic prizes that our exhibitors have provided. So we'll say goodbye for now, and thank you very much.